All right. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Institute for Contemporary Art at VCU's Markel Center. I'm Jessica Bell Brown, Executive Director here, and I'm so thrilled that we have a chance to kick off our fall programming season with the phenomenal collaboration with the Humanities Research Center here at VCU. Now, before I introduce Dr. Christina Stanciu, I'd like to remind you that if you hadn't yet had a chance to experience the three phenomenal exhibitions on view, Lily Cox Richard, Disquiet in the Sand, Aida, and Julian Cruzet, I encourage you to come back. These projects explore our connection to land, place, spirituality, and the hybridities and liminalities that emerge through parsing the worlds and phenomena, natural, cultural, geographic, political, all around us. From our programs to our exhibitions, we aim in our work here at the ICA to explore new ideas and to provide an open forum for dialogue and collaboration across the region and across the world. And as many of you know, our mission here is to listen, to create, and make art public. Now, before we hear from our distinguished guest artists and UVA professor, Horace W. Goldsmith, Distinguished Teaching Associate Professor in the Humanities, Federico Cuatlacuatl, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Christina Stanciu. Dr. Stanciu is the director of the Humanities Research Center at VCU since 2020. She's a scholar of indigenous and multi-ethnic literatures of the United States, with scholarly and teaching expertise in Native American and indigenous studies, literatures of the US, progressive era literature, and visual culture and critical theory. The Humanities Research Center advances humanistic inquiry, fosters interdisciplinary collaboration, and amplifies the impact of humanities scholarship within and beyond VCU. So please welcome Dr. Stanciu.
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I cannot see you, but I'm going to fake my way through my notes. Thanks so much, Jessica, for this wonderful introduction, and what a turnout. This is amazing. As Jessica said, I direct the Humanities Research Center at VCU, where I'm also a professor in the English department. And for those of you who are new to the Humanities Research Center, we are a university-wide center, the only hub for the humanities on campus. And I also wanted to say happy Hispanic Heritage Month. I know it's sort of unfair to start in mid-September to go through mid-October, but here we are. And I'm excited to welcome everyone here tonight. Very grateful to the ICA, Jessica, and to the partnership with the VCU School of the Arts. Many thanks to Cristiana Lafazani, who is here, the dean, for supporting this, and our teams who have worked on this event. Before we move on, I just wanted to say that this talk today is part of our, the launching event of our On Native Ground initiative, which we launched about four years ago at the Pocahontas Reframed Film Festival. And I just wanted to acknowledge that our first artist is here with us. Ethan Brown and his dad and mom are also here. Maybe we can give them a big round of applause for being supporters. Thank you. And our current artist in residence should be here or will be here later. His name is Eric Kriksvold. He's a citizen of the Pamunkey Nation, and he's the artist in residence at the HRC this year. Thanks again to the School of the Arts for studio space and for collaboration with us. We just launched an Indigenous Humanities Lab a few weeks ago, and many of you in this room have participated, so I'm very grateful to you for that as well. I'm very aware of the performative nature of land acknowledgement, but we live in very interesting times, and that's all I'll say. But I wanted to acknowledge that our institution, VCU and VCU Health, acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional lands of the Powhatan chiefdom and the Monacan Nation, their ancestors and future generations. By recognizing Virginia Native peoples' relationships to these lands, we affirm their ongoing presence and their rights to self-determination. VCU and VCU Health commit to learning the history of this land, which is what this event is also about, and to expanding and cultivating meaningful relationships with the 11 Virginia tribes, 7 federally recognized nations: Chickahominy Eastern Division, Monacan, Nansemond, Pamunkey, Rappahannock, and Upper Mattaponi, the 4 state-recognized nations: Cheronhaka, Mattaponi, Nottoway, and Patawamek. We also recognize and commit to expanding and cultivating meaningful relationships with the Algonquian, Iroquoian, and Siouan language-speaking peoples in Virginia. It only took us 2 years to get this land acknowledgement through and approved by the Board of Visitors, but we have one. Now the real work really happens. On behalf of our co-sponsors, I'm very pleased to welcome you all to the first event of the On Native Ground Initiative. As many of you in this room know, this initiative makes visible indigenous histories and cultures across the Americas. And this year we're focusing on Native Virginia with events such as curators of Native art speaking about the Virginia Native Artists Alliance at Cabell Library on October 30th, a screening of Ethan Brown's new documentary, Pamunkey Portrait, on Indigenous Peoples Day, which this year is on October 13th here on campus, and the Provost Lecture Series this year by Stephen Adkins, the chief of the Chickahominy tribe. That's on November the 18th, also at the Cabell Library. And wrapping up the month, of course, celebrating Indigenous cultures and Indigenous film in November with the Pocahontas Reframed Film Festival. If you haven't met Brett Brown, the director of the festival, he's sitting right there, if you can wave. All right, I promise I'm almost done. Federico, the star of the show today, will return for Pocahontas Reframed in November, I'm told, right? So if you don't have a chance to speak with him today, you will have a chance to learn more about his work then. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Federico Cuatlacuatl, to welcome him to VCU again. And I hope you'll stick around for informal conversations and a reception following this talk. Everyone is invited. Now, I have known Federico's work for a number of years now. I was introduced to it through the film festival, and in October 2022, along with Ethan Brown, Federico was invited by the HRC, I think we had just become a university-wide center at the time, to present and discuss the films Tsenacomacaw and First Landings here at VCU. And I think we welcomed over 100 students and faculty for that event, so that was, like this one, a magnificent gathering. At the 6th edition of Pocahontas Reframed, Federico premiered to great acclaim the short film Timekeepers of the Anthropocene. He had just finished in 2022 as part of the festival's ongoing segment on indigeneity beyond the border. And I really appreciate that Brad makes space for that selection, and Federico has been curating that selection for a number of years now. So this short film is a distillation of an artistic vision I much admire as a scholar and as a viewer: indigenous and immigrant, belonging and alien, insider and outsider. As he explains in interviews, quote, "To belong is to reclaim territory, to transcend time and space, to reclaim a new dimension of territory between the past and the future, between two identities, between one's many selves." He calls this practice smuggling traditions as acts of resilience, self-preservation, resistance, and self-rematriation in a dimension of transborder indigeneity. For those of you who don't know him, Federico was born in Coapan, Cholula, Mexico. His work centers topics such as Nahua indigenous immigration, social art practice, and cultural sustainability. Building on his own experience growing up as an undocumented immigrant and previously DACA student, Federico's creative practice focuses on the intersection of indigeneity and immigration under oppressing Anthropocene. Through short experimental films, sculptures, and multimedia installations, his practice is directly informed and profoundly shaped by his lived experiences as part of a community forced to self-displace in the early 1990s. His practice constantly recalls the many months his father spent living in the streets of Tijuana, attempting to cross the Mexico-US border. These generational traumas and the violent history in Mexico toward indigenous communities are constantly shaping his aesthetic work. His artistic research initially questioned the why of forced self-displacement, and his ongoing projects, as you'll see today, are an extension of these inquiries while holding Mexico accountable for the injustices that continue to marginalize indigenous communities. His practice amplifies a more extensive understanding of these communities' histories, migratory experiences, and current diasporic indigeneity from Cholula, Mexico. You're in for quite a treat today. Please help me welcome Professor Federico Cuatlacuatl to VCU again.
Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Thank you for being here. It is an enormous pleasure and honor to be here tonight, and I really appreciate everyone being here. And I think I would like to first start out with acknowledging how difficult it has been these past few months for everyone. It has been quite painful and grieving moments for our most vulnerable communities and for ourselves in solidarity. And for that, I would like to also acknowledge everyone that came before us, that fed that fire for us to continue today. This fire that must continue to burn deep inside of us so that we can continue fighting, resisting, in solidarity. And I think above all, with it all as an act of love. The love to fight, the love to resist, the love to defy borders, the love to erase those borders, the love to defy imperialistic practices, the love for our mothers and fathers who continue to insist on defying that border, the love for our sisters and brothers who continue to cross that border, the love for those who have lost their lives attempting to cross that border, and the love for all the trauma that continues to be left on these lands due to those journeys. I want to also acknowledge the fire, energy, and intergenerational love that persists in these lands, that have allowed us to be here, that give us energy and love to continue to fight under these difficult times. I want to acknowledge those that have defended others, those that have fought against injustices in these lands. And because of that, we continue to have this energy within all of us to be able to move forward as communities. Thank you, Christina, for this generous invitation. Thank you for the ICA for hosting all of us here tonight. Thank you to VCU for this wonderful opportunity to share and to be together and to learn from one another. And most importantly, I think to generate and keep generating this fire and energy amongst us. As Christina mentioned, I am from Cholula, Puebla, Mexico. I was born there, and then I was smuggled in 1999 as a child into the US. I was among the many hundreds of children smuggled from my community into the US. In the early 1990s, there was a big economic recession in Mexico. That really caused the most vulnerable communities to be hurt and to be displaced, or better yet said, to be forced to self-displace. In Puebla, in my home state, we are one of the most vulnerable communities and one of the least protected. And so in the early 90s, most of the community started to migrate, to the point where now more than half of that community lives in the US and Indiana, and that's where I grew up. I went to school as an undocumented immigrant, so an invisible student, if you will. An invisible student trying to be as visible as possible. And this is a duality that always plays in my practice, is the visibility and invisibility of us, of undocumentedness, of these diasporas, of indigenous diasporas that insist on thriving, that insist on that self-preservation. Now, for me, it's always been a lot of questions that come up with my practice. And I think that is the healthiest thing that we can continue to do, is to ask ourselves challenging, critical questions. And for me, is to ask, what happened in Cholula? Why are we one of the most vulnerable communities that was forced to self-displace? In other words, trying to understand what has happened in Mexico that has led to those forced self-displacements. If you're not familiar with the geography of Mexico or Mexico's history, Cholula is centrally located right below Mexico City, or what used to be the Aztec Empire. Cholula was one of the first points of contact with the Spanish, and it was the first strategic point to take over as a colonial invasion. Cholula was the most important religious center in Mesoamerica, and this became, for that reason, the central colonial objective to transform that religious center into the Spanish Catholic Inquisition. Because of that, Mexico went through almost 3 centuries of that Catholic Holy Inquisition, almost 300 years of systemic violence and aggression to convert an entire nation or nations into Catholicism. If you can imagine almost 300 years of massacres, killings, lynchings, and any other aggressive form to convert every corner of Mexico into that faith system. Cholula became the central point for that, and now there's a myth that there are 365 Catholic churches in this small city, which to me says, like, they really wanted every day to be a Catholic day. Unfortunately, it's a myth, but it's pretty close. There's over 250 churches that are Catholic in that small city, the size of Charlottesville. So for me, it is really important to look back at that, to question it, to build transparency, to look for accountability, and how all of that has led to these communities being forced to self-displace. Along with that is to be able to recognize what has happened in the more than 500 years of that colonial presence in Cholula and in Mexico. How can I reach back into that history and highlight and celebrate what has been able to be preserved? In other words, that which has never died and will never die, right? That fire that is intergenerational, that persists and insists beyond borders, and it will continue to do so. The other part of this, as I'm looking at my practice, is the diaspora. People left almost 30 years ago, like my parents, and now there is this beautiful, gorgeous unfolding of a community that insists on being here and continues to endure this journey of undocumentedness, of rerouting oneself, of building a notion of belonging. And so to me, that becomes a constant energy and inspiration, is the resilience and the thriving through which that community has constructed for themselves. What I would like to do tonight for you is share 3 short films that I have been working on for the past few years. And what I would like these films to do is to open up more of these thematics and these ideas that I've been exploring through my practice. The first one that you'll see is titled Animas, or Souls. I wasn't able to leave the country until 2019 legally. Since then, I've been obsessed, of course, with being back in Mexico and reconnecting to the community, to the traditions, to that ancestral knowledge, to the roots, the origins. So in 2022, I relocated to my hometown to absorb all of that. And that's when I started capturing these intimate moments with my cell phone. And it took me almost 2 years to sit with that material and to edit that and then release that 2 years later. So you will see this black and white film shot on phone that to me becomes a love letter. To me becomes an act of love to highlight and celebrate these intimate moments in the community that are ritualistic, that are spiritual, that are the texture of that intergenerational energy that has persisted. And for me, it was really important to highlight that. Again, to look at what has never died despite the more than 500 years of colonial violence. The second film you'll see is titled Tehuameteyolichacawitl, which roughly translates to We Are the Future. This was shot at White Sands in New Mexico. And a shout out to a good friend, Morgan Ashcombe, who helped me on site with this production, as well as Josh Thorid for editing this film, who I think we're hearing his baby say hi. This film was shot in White Sands of New Mexico near the US-Mexico border. In Nahua cosmology, it's really important to revisit sites, land, or territory where there has been a trauma implanted into that land. In other words, how does the land hold memory of traumatic experiences? And for us, it becomes really important to revisit these sites in order to release or to deal with or to reconcile with these kinds of traumatic moments. And so for me, it became really important to visit these sites, but also it became a stage to start imagining or constructing notions of Nahua transborder futurisms, right? What might our futures look like if we were to construct or imagine them themselves? What does that agency start to unfold or look like as we are finally in this moment of building that for ourselves, or at the very least imagining. And then imagining becomes this act of disobedience, right? To, to really have that agency of imagining that future based on that diasporic journey of defying those borders. The third film that we're going to share tonight is called Mochich Chihuichichiquilo. This is a really special short that was shot in my hometown, in the hills of my hometown, which are sacred to us. Every beginning of May, we go up to the hills and make an offering with music, with flowers, with food, to establish a new season in the year, which is when the seeds are planted into the ground. These hills, also for us, are living entities. They're like sponges. They hold the water that feed the community, in other words. And I got to work with my community members for this film, with my neighbor and her daughter as the performers and this regalia. To me, it's been really important to be able to go back and forth now and to film on sites that are specific to the history, the narrative, the culture, the journey of this community. And this third film is where you will also start to see this transborder Nahua Futurism bloom and unfold more, and that is also very specific to where the community has its origins. So we'll play all those 3 short films consecutively, and then Christina and I will jump into a conversation to discuss more recent productions, sculptural productions, and installations that I've been developing this year. And then I would love to hear questions from the audience.
Does this work? Okay, great. I was told to sit here. I hope I'm sitting in the, is that the right arrangement? Sorry about the slight technical difficulty with the sound earlier on. Quite an interesting experience to watch the first movie with and without sound. So we'll ask a few questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for just a few questions, and then we are going to move the discussion to the reception. So what are we watching in the background before we get started? Can you tell us a little bit about the images on the screen, just to introduce, and how do these photographs relate to the films we've just watched?
Yeah, what you're seeing here in the background is new productions, mostly from this year. These are how the films are now expanding, or have been expanding, into sculptural multimedia installations. A lot of the recent thematics, concepts, and feelings that are really pouring into these works are this transborder matriarchal love and energy. Again, I'm thinking about all of well, first of all, I'm thinking about the matriarchal cultural system embedded into Nahua cosmology. And then I'm thinking about all this loving mother energy that follows all of these migrant narratives and journeys. Of course, I'm thinking about my own mom. I wasn't able to see my mom for almost 5 years, and then reunited with her in the late 90s. And then other images that you're seeing here are manifestations of Nahualismos or shapeshifters. This is a heavily embedded belief in Central Mexico of Nahuales or shapeshifters as a means to understand yourself, to understand the land, to recalibrate yourself spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. But shapeshifters can also be a an energy, an attitude that can defy or be disobedient. And so in my interpretation is Nahuales as transborder creatures that defy those borders, that manifest themselves and seek agency over a new piece of land or territory as a means of belonging.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I loved when you introduced the second movie we watched, We Are the Future. You asked this question, how does a land hold memory or the memory of traumatic experience? And I was just stunned by the beauty of the sense. You said that was filmed in New Mexico. Can you talk a little bit about land and landscape and the inspiration for your work? Yeah.
Yeah, you saw some of the, even some of this images back here, or in the last film we saw is the volcano being a central part of the landscape. We have a deep connection to landscape, and so I feel like that is a feeling and this insistence that we keep with us across the border. For us, the volcano becomes a central entity through which we know our existence, meaning that we know the volcano gives life because the volcano captures all the rain as snow and then releases it for rainy season every year, and therefore it gives us a healthy agricultural season every year. There are timekeepers or tiemperos in the region that have inherited this ancestral knowledge and technology to communicate with the volcano, to mitigate this relationship between the human and the non-human. And so for us, this has become really important of how do we build this new notion of belonging or a new notion of home across that border, right? What does that look like in Indiana? What does that look like in this country? How does that start manifesting itself? And so for me, it's like really inspirational to see the diaspora, the community insist on smuggling those traditions and those celebrations across that border to then start to establish a new rendering of that land or that landscape.
Absolutely gorgeous. There are many recurring themes. I'm not sure how many we can talk about tonight, but I was hoping you can tell us a little bit about themes and structure in your work. There's that constant two-ness, right? The two characters, the two panels, right? Sometimes upside down, sometimes alongside, right? There is that idea of coexistence, and I couldn't help but think about the political implications of those very deliberate artistic choices. So can you talk a little bit about the form of your work in relation to how you choose to talk about contemporary issues, undocumentedness, political issues you obviously care about, that you bring into the very specific forms you choose. And I was so moved by the sound, especially in the last film we've watched, and that, conveying that sort of, alternative foreignness, but also grounding us back to the land. So anyway, several questions in this long-winded one.
Yeah, I think the first part to the answer is understanding the emotional experience of what does it feel like to be displaced from your own home, from that place, from that time. But then to learn to embody oneself across that border, meaning how do you simultaneously live back home or hold on to the hope that you will go back one day without knowing or living with the uncertainty of knowing when that's going to happen, if it's going to happen. So for me, it became more of this kind of poetic interpretation of leaving the past, subsisting in the present, and longing for the past and the future. Meaning that we're always insisting that we're going to go back to that past at some point in the future, right? And so for me, immediately it becomes a non-Western, non-linear way of understanding emotionally time and space, right? And for me, that inevitably becomes political. It becomes a gesture of resistance. It becomes an act or mode of revolution is to preserve oneself against notions of assimilation or nationalism or borders, right? And so this is something that I've been tuning into, that is manifested in the works, is the fragmentation of space and time, the upside down or sideways perspectives, the reverse or inversing of time, the collapsing or the colliding or the stretching of these temporalities.
Wonderful. And before we turn it over to you, I know you may have lots of questions. I wanted to ask a pretty unfair question to ask an artist, but I'm a literary scholar, so I think I get a pass to ask this question. And I know we have students who are not in the School of the Arts necessarily. What are your biggest inspirations? How do you produce your work? Like, how do you do it? Is that fair? Is that a fair question? Yeah? Okay. The non-artist.
Yeah. I think from what you have seen is tuning into what the community is manifesting becomes a big power source, a big agency through which I am learning and observing and embracing and loving. That's one part. I think the other part is that in more recent productions this year, I have really been embracing this intergenerational energy, right? And like, what does that look like to build an instinctual spiritual muscle that is non-intellectual, that is non-institutional, that is non-logical, that you or everyone can feel in their own way when you think about the loved ones that have passed, the loved ones that feed the energy for you to move through hard times. And for me, it's really been like tuning into that. And then the other part is I'm obsessed with being back home because it's this constant quest.
Good obsession.
Yes, it's a constant quest to reconnect, but also to highlight or carve out that which has never died or that which is on the verge of dying, such as our language, right? And so in the first film, for example, you heard my grandpa singing, right? And this is something that I do every time I'm back home, is talking to him, asking questions, listening to him speak in our native language, and really embracing and tuning into that memory, right? That is within all of us as a diaspora.
Wonderful. Let's turn it over to you now. I know we have a few people helping us circulate the microphones, so thank you. Would like to take the first question. There's one over here too. Oh, okay. Let's take that.
Hello. Thank you so much for the lecture. There's so many points that I appreciate, but the number one aspect that I appreciate about the whole lecture is the care and love that we see in the work, and entirely and especially the preface that you gave about love and care. That was very evident, and I can feel that emotion coming through as I was experiencing the work. I would love to hear more about your relationship to material, all of these fiber works that we see, all the embellishments and all these forms, and how that also relates to all the topics you were talking about.
Thank you. Cholula is one of the oldest cities in this continent because it never paused as a living society. Because of that, we have one of the oldest markets in this continent, a market that to this day gives so much, and that's where I've been gathering a lot of materials that I have been smuggling over the past few years. But material as memory, material as a spiritual energy, material as an intergenerational memory that persists and that continues to be there. And so for me, it's been really important to gather from these points of origin, but also to work with master craft makers and artists in my home state who have been able to preserve that knowledge and those skills. And so it's been a lot of reaching back into that part of the intergenerational memory too is to work and collaborate with master crafters in Puebla, Mexico, whether they're weavers, embroidery, regalia makers, etc. And then the other part of it is really tuning into how the diaspora also has been bringing these materials and regalia for carnivals and celebrations, and the insistence on smuggling food, seeds, materials, ceremonial objects, etc.
Hi, thank you for sharing your biography and your work tonight. I think the vulnerability of that is just like super admirable. And I kind of had a question similar to the previous one, where in each film, the material and the construction and the costuming and the editing seem to get more experimental. And you mentioned asking challenging questions. And I'm wondering, does asking those challenging questions bring you more clarity or more play?
Unfortunately, it brings more questions, which has been really healthy. But yes, it does bring a lot more opportunity for curiosity and play, right? And to disrupt these kinds of these moments, even in my own community, that are so normalized or that have been so assimilated or imposed onto the people, the landscape, and the cosmology. And so part of what I'm seeing through that play and questioning is to undo, to deconstruct, but also to disrupt, right, with those questionings. And that to me has been kind of like the healthiest mode of approaching each production, right? What are the guiding questions? And I actually have a poem to read when we wrap up with the questions, with more questions.
I don't see any other hands, so that.
Hi, thank you so much. Good to see you again. You talked a lot about history and traditions and ancestors, which are clearly so crucial to the work, but in the second and third film, futurism is incredibly present. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the intention behind a synthesis between these kind of cultural histories in relationship to a futurist vision.
Yes, it's been super helpful to look as far back as necessary in order to be able to see what is ahead as far as possible. And so for me, it's been these dualities or even contradictions colliding, right? And to see things even as like Mexico City once being an empire built on a lake, right? That is no longer there, or part of it is there. Is like, how does that project a sense of futurity that allows us to see sustainable futures for ourselves, right? And it's the same way that I'm seeing how my grandparents and great-grandparents' efforts and love has persisted through the now present, and how that can be a guiding energy also to imagine or construct those imaginaries for futurisms, right? And then I'm also thinking about new generations. The diaspora of generations that was born here, and what might their future look like across borders, right? And to continue to erase those borders based on this insistence of futurity specific to our narratives and histories. One last, oh yeah.
Thank you. Hi, thank you. My question could be a closing question. I think there are no closing questions, though. Before your art was presented to the world and it was more personal and you were making it to express yourself, I assume that you still are, right? But when it was more personal, how did you find hearing your own voice, hearing your own inner thoughts, I guess? I've been trying to articulate this question the whole time I've been sitting here, right? But there's art that we present to the world. The world expects a certain thing from an artist, quote unquote. It's to fit into a box, and this does not fit. No art really fits into a box, but there's still this concept of contemporary art should be blank, 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 depending on who it is you are presenting it to. The audience really does affect how the artist portrays their inner being, their inner self, everything. And so when it was more personal, versus now, could you elaborate on that if you have any thoughts on it?
I mean, even to this day, it's heavily personal. The work is not about me. It's a collective manifestation of that community. But it is heavily personal because my folks remain undocumented, right? My community remains undocumented. People from my community continue to cross the border, right? And so for me, it becomes inevitably a mode of responsibility, of fighting, of resisting, and how the work continues to tune into that personal connection, right? And it's something really painful at the same time as it is something deeply inspirational and moving, right? And I choose to embrace both at the same time. And that to me is the personal part. Okay, I guess we're closing with this short poem these are thoughts, these are questions mainly that I've been thinking about, and a lot of these new productions that you're seeing here on the screen. And at the same time, this goes back to the healthy questions that I've been trying to generate and produce both for myself and for us collectively. Witchcraft of Nahuales to burn everything that needs to burn. I'm going to become a feathered serpent, Nahual, to light fire to all your harm that invades our hearts. We will light fire with all our ancestral force and will burn your feet to cleanse all of your social. You need a cleansing of fire to burn all the harm you have planted and that which consumes you. Let everything burn that needs to be burned in your empire full of social. A shower of fire that burns the root of your harm. You will burn, you will burn, you will burn, so that your ashes may cleanse this land and become the soil for a new fertility of fruits to come. Your white gods will die, and we will dress with their skin for our shower of fire dance. A fire that embraces us and brings us light in this darkness. The fire that never died and that persists in the matriarchal love that defies borders. The fire that protects us. The fire that gives life to the memory of our future. The memory of the fire burns, and that will burn your intestines until all of your social becomes ashes. ¿Cómo quemarle las patas a un imperio? How to burn the feet of an empire. What are the proper ways to smuggle into an empire? ¿Cómo bañar de fuego a un imperio? How best to shower an empire with fire? ¿Qué pasará con las cenizas de este imperio? What will happen to the ashes of this empire? What are the proper ways to deport white supremacy? Where to deport a settler colonial invader? ¿Cómo quemar las fronteras de un imperio? How best to burn the borders of an empire? ¿Cómo transcribir lo sagrado de la desobediencia? How best to transcribe the sacredness of disobedience? ¿Cómo matar los dioses de un imperio? How best to kill the gods of an empire?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you'll join us for a reception, for some food, to continue the conversation. I just wanted to thank everyone who made this event possible, everyone who participated in small and large ways. We appreciate you. Thanks for being here. And thank you, Federico.